Forget about the stories you've read in history books. Our food customs are our most direct connection to the world of the past. This is history that you can touch, smell, and above all, taste.
It's lovely.
The rituals of breakfast, lunch and dinner are something I think we take for granted, as if they have always existed as they are now.
I think I'd have preferred it fried. You'd have a heart attack by lunchtime.
But unpick the stories of our three main meals and you discover gastronomic revolutions, technological leaps and sometimes gruesome realities.
Decay is also going to cause really bad breath.
Yes, I think I've had boyfriends like that.
I never miss a good meal, but food is about more than just filling up. There's a rich and complex history to our daily meal times, and that's what I'm setting out to explore.
Right, dig in.
Of all our daily meals, the first of the day has the most mysterious history. The origins of some of the best-loved breakfast ingredients that I'm going in search of are buried deep in our collective past. But I want to start with what we think of now as a traditional breakfast, and so I've come to the kind of establishment where it still takes pride of place: the British Caff. In this case, a biker's caff. The so-called English breakfast, or full English, is our best-known contribution to international cuisine. This is, I suspect, what most of us think of as the quintessential morning meal. But there's something unexpected going on here, because this isn't the start of the working day, it's the end of the week.
So, Friday night in a biker's cafe, what could be nicer? And you're having a full English.
You can't beat a full English, especially after a long ride.
It's not only a meal that you can eat in the morning, you know, you can eat it pretty much at any point during the day. And I don't believe that they say it's unhealthy for you.
I don't believe that either. But do you ever have it for breakfast?
Most weekends we'll have a fry-up of some kind.
Do you like a full English yourself?
I have been known to have one or 12, yes. In fact, I once got accused by my wife. I'm actually on a diet at the moment, but I was accused of living on them at one point.
Can't think of anything better myself.
Me neither.
The full English has become so iconic, in fact, that it's now a dish to be enjoyed at any time of day or night.
For sure, we'll witness strange mixtures as this time of the day, where people are ordering a breakfast with a glass of Stella.
Personally, I prefer to eat mine in the morning, and nowadays without the pint of lager. The phrase bacon and eggs is so familiar to us now, you might never have wondered how or why they were first put together on a plate. But it's a story intricately bound up with the customs and rhythms of life in a much earlier age, back in the day when our morning meal first got its name. In the Middle Ages, the Catholic Church determined what you could eat and when. One of the most important rules was that no one should eat until after morning mass. Only then could you break your fast. We also have the clergy to thank for creating the combination of bacon and eggs, although it came about almost by accident. Because for roughly half the days of the year, the church forbade people to eat meat at all. On the days when you couldn't eat meat, you would have to face something like this.
Yeah. What's this? Well, this is salt fish which has been prepared in a manner that would have been common in the Middle Ages. So it's saltfish which has been soaked and served here with mustard and honey.
Do you think that Grace would improve the smell?
Probably not, but it might be a good thing to do. Bless us, O Lord, and these thy gifts.
Father Tim Gardner is a member of the Dominican order, which was founded in the 13th century. And he is something of an expert on medieval religious strictures. Actually, it's better than it looks.
It's a lot better than it looks.
Was the belief that a Piscarian diet was in somehow more virtuous?
There certainly was an idea that certain kinds of food had physical effects. And, we know that's true nowadays. I mean, it's not such a strange idea. Chocolate, double cream, they make you feel happy.
That's the serotonin.
Absolutely. So meat is flesh. Mm-hmm. There was an idea around that because meat is the product of sexual reproduction, there was a clear connection between meat in particular and sex. So, you eat meat, you're going to be thinking about sex, which is not what you want monks and friars to be thinking about.
Not if you've taken a vow of celibacy.
Absolutely.
No, that is fascinating. I never actually thought of, the constrictions on meat eating as being because meat was the product of obvious reproduction.
One of the reasons,
yeah. No, that's a new one to me. Nuns and monks had to observe the rules more strictly than most, but they applied to everyone. And the most intense period of abstinence in medieval times was Lent. It became traditional to fill up immediately beforehand on all the things you would not be allowed to eat, which is why we have pancakes. But this is also the point at which bacon and eggs comes into the story.
In Lent, it's a time when you can't eat eggs, and that's a significant source of protein. Something else, of course, that you can't eat during Lent is meat. So it's not just the butter and milk and eggs that we use up on Shrove Tuesday, but meat too. So the day before Shrove Tuesday used to be known as Collop Monday.
Really?
Collop meaning a bit of meat.
Yeah.
And that was a time when scraps of meat might be used up. So if it was pork, bacon, you'd also have eggs that you were trying to use up. So there you have it.
You're full English.
Bacon and eggs.
So that's how it all began, with a single day of indulgence in the medieval calendar just before Lent. But why have bacon with your eggs and not some other kind of meat? To find out more about the origin of our best-known breakfast ingredient, I've come to see an old friend of mine, Jan McCourt. He's a pig farmer. So what breeds have we got here?
Mainly purebred British Lops, which is the rarest of the British rare breeds. And they do us very well. They have good large litters, they're very hardy, and they taste very good.
Yes, absolutely do they. My favourite pig. British Lops.
And a couple of saddlebacks.
Looking at Jan's happy herd, it's not hard to imagine the scene in a medieval village when almost every cottager would have kept pigs. They are wonderfully low-maintenance animals, and given enough space, they can be largely left to forage for themselves, which is very much how Jan likes to do things. What is your philosophy of stock rearing?
Well, when I approached farming from a different life...
from banking?
Yeah. I'd always wanted to farm and to take as extensive as opposed to intensive an approach as possible. And so rear pigs, for example, in family groups, use the woodland as much as possible.
But that's very medieval, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Pigs were kept in small numbers by individuals, and there was a sort of almost a ritual as you ran into the winter where the family pig would be killed, and the whole rota of using every little bit of the animal started.
Having killed one of their pigs, someone in the medieval family would have had the job of butchering it and curing it, just as Jan does.
Ah,
Here we have half a pig.
excellent. What's that of?
That's a British Lot Gloucester Old Spot cross. So we count 3 ribs in, pop the knife in, feel the way through alongside the bones. Mind yourself there. Just bring it over. Now, of course, there'll be lots of butchers watching this who will be incredibly critical. I'm not a butcher. I'm a poet.
A poet. Oh.
And we'll just take that out to leave the leg. So there you have a loin of pork.
Mm-hmm.
This is a mixture of the salt and saltpetre and the various ingredients that you need to dry out the loin. This process takes a minimum of a week.
Most medieval families wouldn't be able to afford to eat a whole pig in one go, naturally. They would have had to make it last, perhaps for several months. And so, to preserve the meat, they cured it. Cured pork is, of course, bacon.
Now, I've left the rind on, because traditionally, obviously, rind should stay on the bacon, and it's one of the delights of it. Now, I can feel the moisture already beginning to leach out because of the salt. So normally that would have been done actually in a container, and then it will go into the tub, and you turn it every day for a week.
So do you have one you cured earlier?
I have. We'll nip over to the kitchen in a minute, and I've got it all sliced up and ready for us to get the sizzle going.
The smell of breakfast.
In a lovely hot griddle pan. Almost needs no time at all.
But there's an important fact to remember in all of this. Apart from Collop Monday, most medieval families probably couldn't afford to have bacon for breakfast.
Shall we give it a go?
Absolutely.
Their pigs were, after all, their main source of meat of any kind.
And like the piece we cured, this is just the short back. Help yourself.
It's lovely. We think of bacon as breakfast now, but historically it was the staple food of almost everybody. And it would have tasted something like this.
But also, the whole pig is curable. You literally bone the whole pig out from top to tail and bury it in salt.
There are records of people doing it in old Roman sarcophagi, especially in the Savanac forest.
I kind of couldn't think of a better way to go, really.
No, quite.
Bacon, in fact, only became associated with breakfast in the 17th century, an age of relative prosperity when people were no longer so tied to the land. Which leads me to wonder what, if anything, do we know about our earliest breakfast customs? This is University College London, my old alma mater, and I've come to meet Dr. Ian Mortimer, a Fellow of the Royal Historical Society, to find out what constituted a medieval morning meal and who ate what.
Dr. Mortimer, breakfast. Did everybody eat the same sort of breakfast, or was it very divisive by structure and class?
It is hugely divided from top of society down to the bottom. Medieval society is hugely hierarchical. An aristocrat would pay 7 shillings for a fish at a time when a working man would earn 4p in a day. At the top end of society, it can be a matter of choice whether you have breakfast. At the bottom end of society, people still starve to death. So for them, it's not a question of whether they have any breakfast, it's whether they have any food at all.
What's the earliest reference you've found to breakfast?
I have come across one reference, which is possibly 12th century, to choristers at St Paul's being given breakfasts if they've been up singing at night. And that's quite specific in bread and ale.
What's the first aristocratic reference?
As far as I can see, it's 1297 when the Countess Joan de Valence is recorded to have had breakfast. And it's not just a little breakfast for her, it's for her whole household, which may well have been as many as 100 people. She also had 20 poor people along, so this was a big breakfast and clearly a certain degree of ceremony, much more like a formal dinner.
So it seems that if you were part of an aristocratic household, breakfast came with the job. And the more extravagant the lord or lady was, the better the breakfast.
By far the best account of what aristocrats might eat for breakfast, and everybody else in their household who is of a certain rank, comes from the Earl of Northumberland's accounts, which is 1512. And to give you an idea of what the Earl of Northumberland and his lady might sit down to, first a loaf of bread in 2 trenchers, then 2 manchets, which is very high-quality white bread, a quart of beer, so a couple of pints to begin with, a quart of wine, because of their status, of course, half a chine of mutton, or else a chine of beef. And beef has always been the favourite food of the English aristocracy. In fact, I notice Edward IV also having beef for his breakfasts. So if you could afford it, then you could eat pretty well.
Breakfast in a 16th century aristocratic household, then, was likely to be a substantial meal. And that trend continued after the Reformation, which did away with the Catholic Church's restrictions on eating food like eggs, milk and cheese. Before long, recipes for dishes like scrambled eggs began to appear, and even boiled eggs were a novelty. I've come to Gainsborough Old Hall in Lincolnshire to meet historic food specialist Caroline Yedham, and she's going to begin by demonstrating for me the old medieval way of cooking eggs, which was to roast them.
Hello, I'm Clarissa.
Hello, Caroline.
What are you up to?
Well, we're starting with some roasted eggs, which
good.
I've got sitting in the ashes. This is a very ancient way of cooking eggs.
Whenever I cook them, I always find them a bit indigestible.
But it's why boiled eggs become much more popular.
And how long do you cook them for?
Well, that depends on how hot the ashes are. And that's a matter of trial and error, because if you make them too hot, then the eggs will explode. So there is a risk.
Do we think it's done?
Definitely.
Do we think it's digestible?
You're welcome to try it.
I will try it. Not bad at all.
Oh, good.
Not bad at all. I think I'd have preferred it fried, but...
Thankfully for egg lovers, help was soon at hand in the distinguished form of Robert May, who, in 1660, published the first comprehensive English cookery book. The accomplished cook contains over 1,000 recipes, including instructions on fried eggs, an early form of scrambled eggs, and 21 kinds of omelette, a recently imported French dish. Omelettes are now a breakfast favourite, but you'd be hard-pressed to go to work after May's recipe according to the Turkish mode. It calls for expensive luxuries like lemons imported from Spain or North Africa, which were only available to the rich, cinnamon from Ceylon, and a particular type of roasted meat.
Hare omelette, that's something out of the ordinary, is it?
There seems to be an explosion in the 17th century of people finding different things to put in omelettes. I've got some chopped almonds here and chestnuts and pine kernels.
Gosh, this is going to be very dramatic. What's that?
This is cinnamon.
Nutmeg.
And some freshly grated nutmeg. So that needs to be mixed and popped on the fire and heated through.
The principle of making an omelette might seem straightforward to us, but although the basic ingredients weren't new, the equipment to cook them was. After centuries of literally roasting in front of an open fire, cooks now had access to a new piece of kitchen technology. With a brazier, they could cook with charcoal, and that meant they had much more control over temperature.
Well done. Hooray!
So this is the hair mixture.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to put these on the edge. And slices of lemon, which of course are very extravagant and fashionable. And I'll scatter some.
What, marigold petals?
Yes.
It's very exciting.
Give you a good layer.
Never would have thought of doing hair this way. Gosh, that's nice. Gosh, that's really, really nice. I love all the different nuts as well as the hair. Wouldn't mind another one of those.
Robert May's omelette is almost certainly too elaborate to have been an early morning dish, but it shows how enthusiastically our cooks took up those basic recipes we now think of as breakfast food. And when it came to eggs at breakfast, a physician of the time, Tobias Venner, urged restraint. Venner's medical book on The Right Way to a Long Life was the first to use the word obesity, and he recommends for breakfast just a couple of poached eggs together with some bread and butter and a good draught of claret. Wine or beer was the traditional morning drink for centuries, but our early morning drinking habits began to change with the arrival of coffee in the 1620s. Before coffee became a breakfast pick-me-up, it was a social drink served in coffee houses, which first appeared in the 1650s. But it was tea imported from China and first sold publicly in 1657 that was adopted more quickly as a domestic drink, not least because it was easier to prepare. Tea was certainly the beverage of choice in this London household when it was the home of Dr. Samuel Johnson, the renowned author and lexicographer. But, surprising as it may sound, tea drinking became a serious social concern during the 18th century amongst a certain class of persons.
Tea.
Thank you, how lovely.
Would you like milk and sugar?
As historian Jane Pettigrew explained to me.
Now, we're in Dr. Johnson's house, and he was a man who was, without being harsh, addicted to tea.
He called himself a shameless and hardened tea drinker, and he drank it right through the day and well into the night, I think.
Not everyone was quite so keen on tea, were they?
No, it's interesting that as the labouring classes began to drink more tea, some people seemed to thoroughly disapprove. And you wonder whether it was because they really seriously thought tea was bad for people, or because they disapproved of it being brought down into the lower classes. This was an aristocratic drink, a luxury drink, an expensive beverage. How dare these people drink tea? But some quite prominent people wrote very serious tracts against tea drinking. So Jonas Hanway, social commentator, decried the fact that chambermaids and housemaids were losing their bloom because of tea drinking. So this was quite an argument that was rattling around in the background at the same time as other people promoting tea as a very health-giving beverage.
So by what date would it have become regular at breakfast or more normal at breakfast?
I think probably by the late 1740s, 1750s, it's beginning to appear at the breakfast table, and breakfast rooms are actually a separate room in the house, so that this was where you went in the mornings to actually have your breakfast tea.
The arrival of the breakfast room, the breakfast table and breakfast tea completed the picture of the morning meal as we might recognise it today, although with rather more niceties than we have now.
So, tea and breakfast.
Yes, here we are at the beginning of the 19th century, and tea has taken its place at breakfast as the recognised drink.
And the soft-boiled eggs are particularly relevant because the first reference anywhere in literature to a soft-boiled egg is in Jane Austen's Emma. When Mr. Woodhouse is proposing to Mrs. Bates that she should have a soft-boiled egg. Searle understands the boiling of an egg better than anyone. I would not recommend an egg boiled by anyone but Searle.
So how do we know these are the sort of things that Jane Austen and her contemporaries would have been eating at breakfast?
Literary references. I mean, wonderful source. The boiled eggs in Emma, the brioche in, I think it's in Northanger Abbey, where she said, I wish you would not talk so much about the French bread that is served at Northanger. And that, of course, would have been the French bread. Yeah. And literary references seem to infer that it was a stretched meal.
Just suited your lifestyle, I suppose. But then also, of course, breakfast parties became very fashionable and started at 10 and ran through till 3, 4, maybe 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So not breakfast at all.
No.
But a party, a major all-day party.
How funny, over breakfast. Now, that's something that could catch on again.
Yes.
But the offerings of a Jane Austen breakfast party are mere morsels compared with that most lavish expression of our morning meal, the English country house breakfast. Country houses were important fixtures in the aristocratic social circuit, and parties based around shooting or hunting might last for days or even weeks at a time. Chatsworth House in Derbyshire is a monument to the most refined kind of country living, and it's a place where, in the 19th century, the English breakfast reached new heights of extravagance. Christine Robinson is the current head housekeeper. She has worked here for more than 30 years, but her knowledge of the history of the house goes back much further.
Here we are in the great dining room.
Wow, look at this.
It is an amazing room, isn't it?
Incredible.
So the table's set here for dinner, but of course this is where the guests would have come down and had their breakfast. And there would have been a buffet on the side, as there is here, which would have been